Díomh Corda Galéir, my name is James Nagle, welcome to The Irish Nation Lives. Charles William St John Burgess was born on the 18th of July 1874 in Dublin, the 10th of 14 children. His father was a Protestant from Carlow, but married a Roman Catholic, for which he was disinherited, and it was in this religion that Burgess and his siblings were raised. In 1888, he attended Belvadere College, where he gained a reputation as a keen sportsman, known to be skilled at everything from cricket to boxing, and at 16 years of age he swam the Channel from Howth to Ireland's Eye. In 1890 he enrolled in a pre-medical course, but dropped out after his first year due to financial difficulties. His father's furniture business had gone bankrupt, forcing the family to sell off a number of properties which had been inherited by his mother. The young Burgess instead took a job as a travelling salesman with Hayes and Finch, an English company which supplied religious goods. In 1899 he joined the Gaelic League, mastering the Irish language, and while attending classes in Offaly he met Kathleen Kingston, who he would marry in 1912. He began to experiment with translating his name into Irish, and in 1908 he settled on the version by which he would be known for the rest of his life, Cathal Brugha. In this year he was also elected president of the Keating branch of the Gaelic League, sometimes referred to as the Munstermen's branch in Dublin due to the dialect of Irish thought there. It was also well known for its radical politics, and was frequented by many members of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, which Brugha was sworn into in 1908. With his membership of these organisations, Brugha became increasingly nationalist. He stopped playing foreign games and became a teetotaler because he didn't want to support the British Treasury's tax on alcohol. In 1909 he no longer felt comfortable generating revenue for an English company, and along with two brothers he left to form a candle-making business. As the brothers provided the starting capital, it was named after them, Lawlers Limited, and from its offices on the North Quays, Brugha would later run the Department of Defence. He was also one of a number of influential IRB members who initially blocked attempts to swear Patrick Pearse into the organisation. Brugha supported calls by Father Patrick Dineen that Pearse be removed as editor of Unclive Solish over his lack of support regarding extra payment for Irish teachers. Seán T. O'Kelly believed that part of the feud was caused by Pearse's favouring of non-Munster Irish, and that Brugha was jealous of his position on the Coiste Gannó, the executive committee of the Gaelic League. While many of those who blocked his membership did so over his continued support for Home Rule throughout 1912, Brugha felt that Pearse's financial dealings were dishonest. St Enda's, the boys' school run by Pearse, was in constant debt, and he admitted that he never kept financial accounts. On its formation in November of 1913, Brugha joined the Irish Volunteers and rose to the rank of adjutant of the 4th Dublin Battalion by the following year. On the 26th of July 1914, he marched 20 volunteers to Howth to assist with unloading the Asgard, which Erskine Childers had landed with a small shipment of rifles purchased in Germany. Following the death of the O'Donovan Rossa in the United States the next year, Brugha was part of the committee that organised his funeral, an indication of his importance within the Republican movement. While Brugha was not involved in the planning of the 1916 rising, he was trusted by those who were, and in early April he was sent to deliver orders to the volunteers in Kilkenny. During the rising he served as Vice-Commandant of the 4th Dublin Brigade under Eoin Ceannt at the South Dublin Union, a large complex of hospitals and workhouses spread over 50 acres. On the morning of Thursday, the 27th of April, British soldiers stormed the compound and pushed as far as the nurses' home, which was serving as the volunteers' headquarters. Amidst heavy fighting, Brugha was caught in a grenade explosion as the volunteers pulled back to a secure area and could be heard calling to the British, "Come on, you cowards, till I get one shot before I die. I am only a wounded man." He then called on Eamon Ceannt to sing "God Save Ireland" with him one last time. Ceannt mounted a rescue and found him sitting propped up against a wall, his gun to his shoulder, waiting to fire at the first sign of enemy movement. Joseph Doolan, a sergeant with the First Aid Section, reported to Ceannt that Brugha had 25 wounds, 5 dangerous, 9 serious, 11 slight. The following morning, delirious from blood loss, arrangements were made for him to be handed over to the British to receive medical attention. Following the surrender, a warrant was put out for his arrest, but the doctors treating him at Richmond Hospital declared that he would most likely die from his injuries. Instead, Brugha left hospital on the 23rd of August 1916. He would walk with a pronounced limp for the rest of his life. Doolan had described his left foot, hip and leg as practically one mess of wounds, and it was joked that there was so much shrapnel left in him that he rattled when he walked. Even while still in hospital, Brugha had been elected to the Provisional Committee of the Irish Volunteers, and following his release, he threw himself into its reorganisation. In October 1917, he was elected chairman of the Resident Executive, effectively the Chief of Staff. In 1917 and 1918, a number of courts of inquiry were held as to what had gone wrong during the Easter Rising. Brugha headed a number of these, including the one that exonerated Thomas McCurtain and Terence McSweeney over their command of the Volunteers in Cork. He also left the Irish Republican Brotherhood, publicly arguing that they were no longer necessary now that the Volunteers were an open military organisation. In private, however, he was bitterly critical of the failure of much of the IRB membership to fight in the Rising. He was distrustful of their secretive nature and said that only Tom Clark and Seán McDiarmid could have kept the organisation free from corruption. Throughout 1917, Brugha was involved in the political discussions on the future of Sinn Féin, and the compromise agreement that saw Éamon de Valera elected as party leader unopposed at the October Ard Fheis was drafted at his house. During the election for the party's 24-person standing committee, Brugha and Constance Markievicz demanded that Eoin MacNeill be kicked out of Sinn Féin over his actions in 1916, but when the votes were cast, MacNeill topped the poll, with Brugha coming in second. Father Michael Flanagan would later say that this was an early manifestation of the split, which would come to the surface during the Irish Civil War. At the start of the conscription crisis in April of 1918, Brugha volunteered to lead a squad of men to London to wipe out the British government. The plan was approved by the volunteer executive, which included Éamon de Valera and the new Chief of Staff Richard Mulcahy, and Brugha narrowly avoided being arrested as part of the German plot roundup in May. For the next few months, he and his men would tail members of the British cabinet and attend meetings of the House of Commons, prepared to strike if conscription was introduced to Ireland. Brugha was treated with a great deal of respect by the ushers, who believed because of his military bearing and limp that he was a wounded British soldier returned from the war. On at least one occasion, Brugha sat in the viewing gallery directly over the government benches with a Mauser pistol down the leg of his trousers. Eventually, attempts to introduce conscription were dropped, and the mission was called off in August. At the general elections in December of 1918, Brugha was nominated to stand in Waterford County, where he was elected with over 3/4 of the vote. He was selected as Ceann Comhairle for the first meeting of Dáil Éireann on the 21st of January, conducting the entire day's proceedings in Irish, and was elected temporary President of Dáil Éireann the following day. In April of 1919, after the release of the German plot prisoners, a full meeting of Dáil Éireann took place. Brugha stepped down as president to facilitate de Valera's election and was appointed as Minister for Defence. Throughout the War of Independence, Brugha's main concern was to establish Dáil control of the army, and he was especially wary of the growing influence of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, now led by Micheal Collins. In August of 1919, he introduced an oath of allegiance to be taken by all members of the Irish Volunteers, and this is popularly accepted as the moment when they became the Irish Republican Army. While he supported Dáil Éireann's attempts to gain recognition of the Irish Republic peacefully, he also supported the use of violence. In July, along with Richard Mulcahy, he authorised Micheal Collins to gather men for special duties. At the end of the month, they shot dead Detective Sergeant Patrick Smith, and later went on to form the backbone of the squad. During the War of Independence, Brugha would constantly return to his plans to attack the British government, declaring in 1921, "If you wiped out every black and tan in Ireland tomorrow, you'd have shiploads of them pouring in again the day after. To save Ireland, you have got to wipe out the guilty ones who sent the black and tans here. We have got to wipe out every member of the British cabinet." His plans were now opposed by Collins and Mulcahy, who believed that they would result in negative publicity and overwhelming force being deployed in Ireland in response. Brugha would fall out with both of these men during 1921. He reduced Micheal Collins to tears over accusations of financial irregularity and attempted to replace Mulcahy as Chief of Staff. Most famously, his lengthy and bitter tirade against Collins during the treaty debates is said to have convinced some TDs to support the treaty in sympathy with Collins. Though many would later paint him as a militant extremist, when the real militant extremists seized the forecourts, Cathal Brugha was not amongst them. The likes of Rory O'Connor and Liam Mellows were suspicious of his commitment to politics. During the treaty debates, he had spoken in favour of de Valera's Document No. 2, a compromise unacceptable to the hardline Republicans. Once the Free State began shelling the forecourts on the 28th of June 1922, Brugha enlisted in the Dublin Brigade and commanded anti-treaty forces on O'Connell Street. On the 5th of July, his position in Hammond's Hotel could no longer be held. He ordered his men to surrender, but emerged himself onto a side street brandishing a revolver. He was hit in the leg by a bullet and taken by members of Cumann to the Mather Hospital, where he died on the 7th of July. Brugha's detractors would later claim that he had done little of value as Minister for Defence and was driven by his petty jealousy of Micheal Collins. However, as the political representative of the army, Brugha believed that it wasn't his job to control the men on the ground, but to provide General Headquarters with what they needed and receive updates from them on the conduct of the war. While Mulcahy would later attempt to talk himself and Micheal Collins up at the expense of Brugha, the reality is that neither the Department of Defence nor General Headquarters had much of an impact on the conflict. The fighting men had to adjust to conditions on the fly and often functioned with little to no contact with Dublin. Brugha is probably most well known for his fraught relationship with Micheal Collins. While the likes of Mulcahy and Ernest Bligh would ascribe this to bitterness and jealousy, and it would be wrong to rule that out fully, Brugha was mainly motivated by guarding the supremacy of Dáil Éireann over the army. The Irish Republican Brotherhood had infiltrated and taken control of the Irish Volunteers once before, and it was clear that they were trying to do the same again. The oath in August of 1919 was an attempt to prevent this, to bring the Volunteers under political authority and make Dáil Éireann responsible for their actions. When presented at all in histories of the period, Brugha is often described as a two-dimensional caricature, an unintelligent Republican fanatic driven by bitterness and violence. He could be a profoundly difficult person to work with, was uncompromising on small matters and disdainful of those he disagreed with, but he was also unquestionably, often dangerously brave, determined that the army be answerable to Dáil Éireann and not controlled by shadowy figures in the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and, in the end, willing to compromise on the Republic, though the treaty was a step too far. It could be argued that De Valera drafted document number 2 specifically with Brugha in mind. If it was acceptable to him and Austin Stack, it would be acceptable to the majority of the rank and file who shared their mindset. Though often misunderstood or totally overlooked, Brugha was an immensely important figure in the Irish Revolution, and in future episodes I'll cover the breakdown in his relationship with Collins and Mulcahy as Ireland heads towards civil war. This episode comes out around the channel's 2nd birthday, so thank you all for your support over the past 2 years, and I hope you will continue to hang around for all the content yet to come. There are a number of major figures in the Irish Revolution that I want to cover in future episodes. If you have any suggestions on who you would like to see next, please leave them in the comments. Accorda, thank you for joining me on The Irish Nation Lives. Slán go fóill.